Good morning again. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Zachary DeWolf. I am a citizen of the Chippewa Cree Nation of Rocky Bow, Montana. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the communications director with Washington Conservation Voters. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for today's press briefing on the Evergreen Futures 2021 Legislative Report Card. Very excited to show this to you and share this with you. Before we begin, I want to make sure that we do our land acknowledgement here as part of Washington Conservation Voters. We are honored to live and work on the traditional and ancestral lands of the nations whose current lands we call Washington, including the Chehalis, the Chinook, the Colville, the Cowlitz, Duwamish, Hoh, Jamestown, Kalispell, Iqalis, Lower Elwha, Lummi, Makah, Marietta Band, Muckleshoot, Nisqually, Nooksack, Palouse, Port Gamble, Puyallup, Quileute, Quinault, Samish, Soxhawtla, Shoalwater, Skokomish, Snohomish, Snoqualmie, Snoqualmie, Spokane, Squaxin Island, Steilacoom, Stillaguamish, Suquamish, Swinomish, Tulalip, Upper Skagit, Wanapum, and Yakima nations. We recognize that borders are artificial. Many tribal nations from the north, the south, and the east of present-day Washington also have historical and current ties to these lands. We express our gratitude as guests and thank the original and current stewards of this land. What we experience today is a product of these nations' ancestors' ability to be in relationship with the natural world. We would not be here without their guardianship and connection to the earth. We also acknowledge Black and African labor on which this country built its prosperity. We honor you. Next, I would love to invite my fabulous colleagues to introduce themselves. These are today's speakers. So I'll turn it over to Emily.
Hello, good morning. My name is Emily Krieger. This is she, her pronouns, and I'm our political and civic engagement manager.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kat Holmes. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the field director.
And good morning, Lisa Remlinger, she, her pronouns, Chief Policy Officer for Washington Environmental Council and Washington Conservation Voters.
Wonderful. Thank you again. These are just some of the awesome colleagues I get to work with here at Washington Conservation Voters. The first thing I wanted to share with you today was our ad called "What Will an Evergreen Future Look Like?"
What will Washington's future look like? It can be a future where we spend time with the ones we love, where we can count on what makes our state such an amazing place to live. A future where as our economy recovers, we do it the right way. A future where everyone has the opportunity to enjoy a healthy environment. Our evergreen future starts now, with you. What will Washington's future look like? What will Washington...
Right. Now you've heard a little taste from our ad. I'll now turn it over to my colleague Emily to share what is Evergreen Future.
Thank you, Zachary. So the Evergreen Future campaign is Washington Conservation Voters' 4-year campaign that we launched in 2020. And this is our roadmap for the next 4 years to show us how we can tackle the state's biggest health and environmental challenges. The campaign will push elected officials and candidates all across the state to support bolder climate action and stand up for the interests of their communities. The campaign includes 4 major policy pillars, as you can see here. Act on climate because everyone deserves clean air, transportation, and living wage jobs, clean water and healthy forests, environmental justice and public health because we need equitable solutions and action on issues like voting justice and holding corporate polluters accountable. These 4 pillars together really blend together environmental justice, economic justice, racial and social justice, and public health to show the future that we want for Washington State and the future that we're working towards. And now it's time for action because we know that 7 in 10 Washingtonians support this Evergreen Future platform. And we really need leaders who are going to run for office and be elected on these ideals, who will prioritize things like public health, protecting workers, and investing in policies that address climate change, clean up toxic pollution, and restore our forests and our waters. The wins this legislative session have really demonstrated the importance of launching the campaign when we did right now in 2020. Before we launched the Evergreen Future campaign, we had a strong House in the legislature that was ready to push for bold action, but our Senate was really unwilling to take the bold, aggressive action that we needed on some major bills like the Clean Fuel Standard. So we launched this campaign to make sure that we are pushing on those important issues for Washington State. And now, as we've wrapped up this first full year of the Evergreen Future campaign, we've launched something really exciting, the first annual Evergreen Future Legislative Report Card. And this report really provides an analysis of how the legislature performed on each of those 4 policy pillars that I mentioned, that you see up on the screen here as well. And it highlights some of the important bills that we worked on this legislative session, and also the roles that some of our most influential legislators that we worked with played. So you'll see here, this is the Evergreen Future website, and the report card is housed here on the site for folks to scroll through and look at some of the specifics under each of those pillars. We have a little bit of an analysis of what this report card is and what we accomplished this session, and a grading system that lays out 3 major categories: leading the way, mixed bag, and lagging behind, to show where we landed on each of the 4 pillars. And if you click through, you can see on each of the 4 pillars some more specifics about what unfolded this legislative session and some of the bills that we were focused on, as well as where we landed with those 3 different scores on each pillar. So through reviewing the environmental progress made in this report card, we have the ability to now hold our elected officials accountable to their commitment on Evergreen Future and highlight where we still need bold action in the next 3 years, because we're just at the end of year 1 in this 4-year campaign. And it's really critical that we're taking the time to do this now at the end of year 1 to evaluate where we're at, process where we still have progress to make, celebrate some of those wins, and ensure we have this insight shared with the public. And now I'm going to hand it over to our field director, Kat Holmes.
Thank you, Emily. I want to highlight that the success of this legislative session was a result of community power. We are thrilled to wrap up our first 15 months of the Evergreen Future campaign and see the momentum that community power built. So 2021 was our first legislative session of engaging folks around our new Evergreen Future platform, and it was received with enthusiasm by activists. This is the right platform for this moment in time in Washington State, in particular in the way that it centers people and environmental justice. We built on the momentum of 2020 when we launched the platform to candidates, incumbents, and activists. Since then, we've had over 500 volunteers and attendees at 15 Evergreen Future events, trainings, and actions. Our activists and volunteers led meetings with legislators before session, lifting up the platform and lobbying on its behalf. And with our community power, we organized lobby days, digital weeks of action, an accountability series to encourage champions to advance our policy pillars and lead, taking bold votes and pressuring legislators who were lagging behind. We're looking forward to continuing our accountability work over the summer and fall, supporting our activists with interim meetings with legislators, hosting a lobby day boot camp, teach-ins on policies and the next steps to make them stronger, as well as kicking off our Evergreen Future local election outreach campaign. In other words, we will keep building our community power. And with that, I will hand it over to our Chief Policy Officer, Lisa Remlinger.
Thank you, Kat. So let's talk for a minute about what was accomplished and where we still have work to do. With environmental majorities in the legislature, state leaders should be applauded for the progress they made during the 2021 session. Washington State is now a national leader on climate, environmental justice, and voting rights. On water and forests, the legislature made progress on some really important issues related to shoreline armoring and community forests. For shoreline armoring, residential marine shoreline owners, property owners, are now required to use the least impactful bank protection when they replace hard shore armoring. For community forests, a grant program was funded to help ensure local ownership and sustainable management of our forests. Another major win was the HEAL Act. The HEAL Act policy was shaped after a year-long environmental justice task force process, which created recommendations based on public input from communities across the state. The bill creates a state-level environmental justice council and sets targets for integrating environmental justice into agency work plans, decisions, and public processes. The legislature also took critical steps this year to make polluters pay for pollution that causes climate change, curtailing the manufacturing of harmful products like styrofoam and plastics, and ensuring that farm workers are paid for overtime, including back pay for years of overtime wage theft. And of course, last but not least, after more than a decade of work, we now have our Climate Commitment Act. Washington State now has an economy-wide cap and trade program designed to center overburdened communities and meet state targets of net zero emissions by 2050. So now moving on to what still needs to be done. Although we applaud the legislature for their progress, there is always more work to do, particularly on land use, climate smart buildings, and salmon recovery. Specifically incorporating salmon recovery into land use planning and setting a target for net ecological gain. Also, a clean and just transportation bill was not introduced this year, but concepts were released by both chambers. We need a clean and just transportation package that centers people in its investments and ensures robust funding for ongoing priorities across the transportation sector. And finally, we need to modernize our policies within the built environment, from buildings to land use, to address climate impacts that decarbonize our world and improve the health and safety of our state. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Emily to talk about what's next.
Thank you, Lisa. So what's next for the Evergreen Future campaign? Since this campaign runs year-round, now that we have the 2020 election year and the legislative session behind us, we're turning our attention to 2021, the local election cycle, and looking forward to 2022. Washington conservation voters, as part of our endorsement process this year for local candidates, is asking those candidates to sign on to support the Evergreen Future platform in our endorsement questionnaire. And now that we've only completed a portion of the endorsements that we will complete this year, but we've actually had over 120 candidates around the state who are running for local offices who have signed on and pledged to support the Evergreen Future platform. And we've adapted that platform to differentiate between the local and the legislative needs, so that it feels like a better platform for local candidates. And we'll be working with those candidates to figure out what does Evergreen Future mean for their communities, for their campaign, and for the office that they are running for. And what values do they hold at the local level? So with that, thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it back to Zachary.
Thank you so much. And thank you to my colleagues, Lisa, Emily, and Kat for today's presentation. The link to the report card is in the chat, and I'll also send that out to you as well as with this video. So thank you so much for joining us today for this briefing on the Evergreen Future 2021 Legislative Report Card. If you have any questions, please contact me, Zachary DeWolf, at 206-771-4207, or at my email at zachary@wcvoters.org. We'd be happy to provide resources, background, quotes, or more information, however you see fit. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day, and happy Pride.